Hi everyone. This is just a short, not too serious talk about my initial start into 3D printing. I've called it Journey into the Unknown. I'd like to have the sort of build up from the start of 2001, but I couldn't get the sound files, so I just like the poster. So you get the idea of what the talk's going to be like. So really it's about my experiences of getting going, really. I've been printing for only about 2 months. Some of the errors I made, please forgive me if I state the obvious. I'm not trying to teach your grandma how to suck eggs because, you know, if you do, it can go terribly wrong, obviously. So, getting started, I quite like this Cliffy. I wanted to help practically, really. I was really impressed with the way the 3D crowd was starting to get going and actually do something practical. So I decided I wanted to get a printer. I've been thinking about getting one for a while. One of my hobbies is I fly model RC planes, so I thought it would be quite useful for that. And I also wanted to get into designing as well as copying from just the object libraries. So basically what you need. So again, excuse me, I know these are obvious. This talk is really aimed at people that haven't got started or have only just got started. So you obviously need a 3D printer. So you need a computer of some sort that has USB ports. I'm currently using a MacBook Pro, some form of slicing software, which you've heard about today and yesterday, but I'll go over a little bit about it. A couple of friends that have done it before is really helpful because as one of the previous talks said, that this isn't a plug and play technology. Whatever you do, you really need to have some help with it. The next thing is to decide what sort of materials you want to use. There's a number of ones out there that have different characteristics and are easier or harder to print with. So do a little bit of research and see what type of things you want to print. And of course, lots and lots and lots of patience. It really, when it works, it's great, but it doesn't work for quite a lot of the time. So you really have to throttle back on enthusiasm sometimes and just try and go through and start the print again. So how do you choose a printer? So obviously budget is an important thing, and decide what features you need. For me, we'll talk about self-leveling later, but it's worth doing further research to see the sort of things, characteristics that they have, and what you think you want. Another point is obviously looking at shipping times, because most of them are built in China, so some of them are in this country, but some have to get shipped. So, and look at as many reviews as possible. So, but this is how I did it, obviously. So I went through, you know, trying to see. I didn't know anything about them really. I had a couple of friends. I went with a make initially that a friend had, but basically it wasn't quite the same one. So the first one I got was an Anycube Mega Zero. Cost 168, large print size that seemed good, manual leveling, and it suggested I use the Cura software for slicing, which everyone you know who's been on so far might have heard of it. I'll go through what slicing is in a minute if you don't know. And as I said, I've got a MacBook Pro, which is what I used it on. So slicing is where you get an STL file, which is basically an object file that your 3D CAD printer software has produced. And you then need to cut it into little bits so that your printer will understand it. The G-code files are just a series of X, Y, and Z coordinates with additional printer commands. They're always specific to the particular printer you get, as you've probably seen on some of the other talks that we've seen today. But my first weekend of trying to do the printer was not really very successful. The first thing you have to do to set it up is to set up the leveling. And I basically spent about 3 days trying to level the platform manually. On the Mega Zero, you put the nozzle at each corner, you put a bit of paper underneath it, underneath where the nozzle is, and you adjust it so the paper just drags away from the plate. And you then move to the next corner and repeat. And I found by the time I got back to the first, it was loose. And I did it again and again and again, and it sort of pulled my hair out. So if we go back to what the printer looks like, you can see the knobs on the bottom of the plate. Now, I have seen people with manual leveling printers, and obviously they work fine. Just for me, in this case, I mean, the printer, when I got it, seemed fine, quite robust, moderately well put together for the price range. I could just not get it to level properly. It was really frustrating. So eventually, in the end, I also had problems with the nozzle gumming up, because, you know, the first time you get something like this, it's quite difficult to know what it is that's wrong and how you need to sort it out. And, you know, I was on the phone to my friends for most of the weekend. But eventually, I decided to say goodbye and return it to its ancestors. So the one I've got now is a FLSUN QQS. Obviously, different price bracket, a little more expensive. But one of the reasons I got it is it's got self-leveling. And the great thing for me was I managed to start printing the mask the day after it arrived. So it was a good first layer. And, you know, the first mask came out really well. I was really pleased with it. I did an elephant benchy and an invisible table. So you can see the elephant benchy on the invisible table. But I still today have problems with it, which is partly due, I think, to when you get into the printing, starting to get down to what the technical issues are. So for me, and currently at the moment, I have an issue with adhesion to the bed. So I'm trying to use hairspray. I've got a 0.4 nozzle, which is the normal standard nozzle, but it's still not working very well in some cases. And at the moment, I think there's a bit of rattling going on. I don't know if that's standard to this particular type of printer. Well, I have to look up a bit more about it. I have found issues with filament. I left a filament on the printer for about 2 weeks. And when I tried to print the bottom layer, it just wasn't sticking. I then put the filament back to the one that I got with the printer, and it seemed a lot better. I'm trying to learn how to model with Blender on the Mac, which has been a little bit tricky because Blender is a freeware software tool, really powerful, but it relies on Windows keyboard hotkeys for everything. So I've struggled a bit with that, but then actually I just plugged a Windows keyboard in, which has got rid of a lot of the problems. I've only printed with PLA at the moment. I've not tried anything else. I've got some PETG, but I understand there's different issues with it. One thing I should also note on this printer, it does have a hotbed, which again is quite helpful. So the first printer didn't have one. So this helps, I think, with adhesion and some of the other issues. So it's only a short talk, really, because I think a lot of the areas have been covered before. I'd like to thank my mates, Peter and Andy, for helping me, and also 3D Crowd. No grandmothers were harmed in the making of this video. And I've got some links, which I'm sure most of you might have seen, Thingiverse, Yegi, and other libraries of objects. And there's lots of videos on YouTube for things you need to watch, which are quite helpful. Hopefully you're still awake and it's not been too dull.
I think, yeah, we're all here.
Okay.
So we've got some advice to start with from Paul.
Great. Okay.
To say that the rattling in the bearings is normal for him. There's quite a lot of play in the rods on the printer. Yeah,
I found that. I wonder if the play in the rods has caused some sort of clogging of when you try and do fine detail, because I'm getting a problem with that at the moment.
Okay. And he's also got some advice on the adhesion. His tips are the flow, speed, and temperature. They're things to look at.
Okay, well, I have knocked the speed to half speed with some of the adhesion, but I've just done a print that was 5 hours, and 4 hours into it, actually, I'll say, I don't know if you can see this, it came loose, which was a bit of a problem, really. So I printed a brim for it, which was great, but it was a bit sad to see hour 4, you know, it sort of moving around stage. So you can see here, you can see where I'm getting clogging. So I'm sure people have had this before. So I'm using a 0.4 nozzle. So one of the suggestions I've had is that I should go to a 0.2 nozzle because it's quite, it's quite fine. But these again are part of the learning curve with all this, really. All right.
And so we've also had a tip from Jamie of trying Fusion 360, which is free and available for Mac for trying to design
Okay.
objects.
All right, I'll try that.